This week on Jerusalem Dateline, Christians in Syria are appealing for help. Who will pray? And hear the plight of one Iranian Christian facing deportation from Sweden back to Iran. Plus, the secret story of an ex-CIA agent who fought terrorists after 9/11. Then see how Israel sits at the global crossroads for millions of birds. All this and more this week on Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell, coming to you this week from Mahane Yehuda, Jerusalem's open-air market. Christians and others inside the Syrian town of Afrin are calling on the world for help and for prayer. Many are surrounded by Turkish troops and Islamic militias that are threatening to kill them unless they convert to Islam. Here's a plea for help from the Christian group AVC International, posted on Facebook, asking for prayer for these persecuted Christians.
Friends, on the 12th of March, we received a distress call from a church leader in Syria. The inhumane attacks against the city of Afrin have continued unabated since early January. Thousands of people, as a result, face starvation, homelessness, and are unable to receive basic medical attention because of a lack of supplies and exhausted doctors. But this phone call confirmed our worst fears. At this very moment, Islamists and the Turkish army are going door to door in the towns and villages seeking out non-Muslims. And when they find them, they're giving them the opportunity to bow down and worship Allah right there in front of them or face the consequences. Friends, this situation poses a great threat to the church. From a human perspective, there is very little we can do. But as believers and spiritually, we can do something. Jesus Christ himself commissions us as the body to pray for the body who is suffering. Friends, we can come together very powerfully in unity in prayer and bring these people before the Lord and trust God for his intervention in this situation. And so we're asking you, friends, please, will you join us to pray? For the next 21 days, we want to fast and pray for the church in Syria. At 5 p.m. CET, Central European Time, we will come together for a few minutes and join our hearts and our minds together in prayer, bringing this body before the Lord. God has the final word, and we're trusting him for his perfect will in this situation.
Please join us in prayer for these Christian brothers and sisters. And for more information on the situation, please go to cbnnews.com. Another Christian in a desperate situation is Adine Stranson, a Christian from Iran living in Sweden. Last year, we brought you her story, and now the Swedish government has decided to deport her back to her home country. Many of you have asked for an update on her situation, and Dale Hurd visited her in Stockholm as she waits for deliverance or deportation.
She is a woman without a country. Idine Stranson is officially a stateless person. No passport, no citizenship, unable to get a job, and living every day with the knowledge she could be deported to her native Iran, where, as a Christian, she could face grave danger. A worldwide outcry over her situation has apparently not changed anything.
The world was outraged when the Swedish government decided to send a Christian and ex-Muslim back to Iran, where she could be imprisoned, raped, and even killed. But it didn't seem to bother the Swedish government at all.
After CBN News first brought the former Iranian actress's story to the world stage, the government of Hungary offered her asylum, and many people from around the world wrote the Swedish government asking it to reconsider.
It was really like a miracle for me when so many people in America, they called the Sweden embassy. Many people, they sent a comment to me and they said, "You are welcome to our country."
But Sweden's migration board told CBN News none of that matters. Idine's case has been turned over to the Swedish border police for deportation. Now she waits in a kind of legal limbo.
Aydin's situation is not at all unusual in Sweden. There are a fair amount of people who get stuck in between.
Swedish attorney Gabriel Donner knows Sweden's asylum process as well as anyone. He represented 160 Christian asylum seekers last year alone.
In your experience, should she expect to eventually be deported?
She is running that risk, quite obviously.
Aydin Stranson came to Sweden from Iran in 2014 on a work visa and adopted a Swedish last name. She left Islam and became a Christian in Iran after seeing a video of Muslims stoning a woman to death. And then she had a dream about Jesus. When she arrived in Sweden, she requested a public baptism.
I want to have it baptized in a public because I want to say I don't afraid anymore. I'm free, I'm Christian. I want everybody to know about that.
Which means the Islamic government of Iran knows. And because she starred in films and a TV series in Iran, it makes her an even bigger target if she is sent back. It's not clear if or when that might happen.
Well, when it comes to the border police, it all depends on whose table it lands on. Sweden's backlog is growing and growing and growing. Right now, it's around about 2 years and growing. This is contrary to European Union law, but nobody cares.
Donner says Aydin would first be sent to prison while authorities made arrangements to fly her to Iran.
This is real prison conditions. They're not allowed to speak in telephones. They're not allowed to be on a computer. They're not allowed to get in touch with anybody. They wear prison clothes. If they're transferred anywhere, they're transferred in chains.
Swedish authorities would then contact Iran and tell them Aydin is coming and when to expect her. Even though Sweden's migration board says on its own webpage it will never deport asylum seekers to nations where they face danger. Doing so is a violation of the Geneva Convention on Refugees. Sweden's migration board says it cannot comment on her case. Aydin spends her days helping at church or training in Taekwondo. She's earned a black belt, but the migration board took her certificate because she's not a legal resident. She thought she landed a job with the technology giant Ericsson as a computer programmer. But the Swedish government wouldn't allow that either. Sweden turned down Ericsson's plea to let her work for them.
So as soon as you get your negative, you cannot get any support of any sort, no housing, no place to work, and so on, even if you had a job before. The idea is to starve you to the point where you come to them and say, please send me out.
But she's staying in Sweden because her family is here, and because she says Jesus told her not to be afraid. Stranson and other Christian asylum seekers in Sweden face deportation at the same time that the Swedish government has given 150 protected identities to former ISIS fighters who have returned to Sweden so that they can find jobs. There will be no such help for Aydin.
There have been fast lanes for Syrians, and there have been fast lanes for Somalis, but not for Iranians, and definitely not for Christians. We have even one judge here in Stockholm who never has said yes to any Christian.
If they're going to act on her case to deport her, she'll get a letter?
She doesn't necessarily get anything. They just turn up, and can turn up anytime.
I don't know what will happen for me in future, but I should say to them, thank you. To people, to CBN, and to you, to all the people try to help me. I just can't say Jesus bless them all.
Dale Hurd, CBN News, Stockholm.
Coming up, an inside look at the secret life of a CIA agent as she tracks down Islamic terrorists. She's a former CIA officer who infiltrated ISIS and led an amazing escape mission. Now she's written about her covert life in a new book called Breaking Cover. National security correspondent Eric Gonzalez talked with Michelle Rigby-Assad about how her faith led her to become a successful operative.
How do you stop terrorist organizations like ISIS from committing violent attacks in cities like New York City, Times Square? You have to go undercover, infiltrate them, learn how they think and act. And that's what Michelle Rigby-Assad did for the CIA.
I spent 10 years as an undercover counterterrorism officer in the CIA, and because my expertise is in the Arab world, the majority of my career was spent in the Middle East region.
That meant Assad and her team, often including her husband, a fellow agent named Joseph, worked against the likes of Al-Qaeda and ISIS.
What's it like to work with these guys side by side? I mean...
Well, it is fascinating. The best schooling in terrorism a person can get is being in front of those guys like that, which going to Iraq for our tour, we're allowed to say that that I and my husband served in Baghdad for a year. We got to interact with those sources and really get to know what they were thinking and where they're coming from. And
what made them tick?
What made them tick? Right, exactly. And which is fascinating because if they'd met you on the street, they'd prefer to cut your head off instead of actually deal with you. But for whatever reason, they've decided, I'm going to work with the CIA to take out other members of my group.
That's all Assad says she can say, but she does add a major hurdle she had to overcome, interrogating these terrorists and being a woman.
For them, I was the opposite of what they were expecting to meet with. And I had to really work at establishing a relationship with them where they would see me as intelligent and knowledgeable of the Arab world. You know, because in their minds, I should be at home managing the family, and I can't even leave the home without a male minder or without being completely covered in black. So I was a complete anomaly to these guys.
Assad's book, Breaking Cover, My Secret Life in the CIA and What It Taught Me About What's Worth Fighting For, covers how becoming a CIA agent was the last thing on her mind. She didn't even know her eventual role even existed. Then when 9/11 happened, she and her husband knew God had them on the right path.
Here were two committed Christians who were Arabists, pre-positioned to enter the war on terror from the very beginning. Who knew but God?
In her book, Assad wanted to give a realistic view of a CIA undercover counterterrorism officer. She not only describes analyzing sources who were driven by radical, hateful ideology, but also how she surrendered her life to God.
Ordinary people can do extraordinary things when their faith is greater than their fear and intimidation. And it's really to give people the encouragement to do the hard things in life.
The book's final chapters describes life after the CIA, specifically a rescue mission leading a group of persecuted Christians out of Iraq before ISIS terrorists moved into their village.
Miraculously, even though the evacuation almost fell apart on numerous occasions, on December 10th, 2015, we successfully airlifted 149 Iraqi Christians out of northern Iraq to their new homes in Slovakia.
What does Assad hope people take away from her book? A greater understanding of her belief and faith in Jesus Christ, but also how people should never give up, reaching for their goals. Eric Rosales, CBN News, New York City.
Up next, an in-depth look at the historic move of the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. On May 14th, the U.S. will officially move their embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. That falls on the 70th anniversary of the founding of the State of Israel. CBN News senior international correspondent Gary Lane talked with David Parsons from the International Christian Embassy Jerusalem about President Trump's decision and how the original law was passed more than 2 decades ago.
President Trump announced we're moving the U.S. Embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. So not many Americans know that there was actually a law that was passed in 1995. You were responsible for the first draft. Tell us about it.
The Gingrich Congress had just come in early 1995, and it was the first time the Republicans had control of the House of Representatives in about 40 years. It was in the midst of the Oslo process. We felt Christians in particular should speak up and to guard Jerusalem from the Palestinian Authority. The PLO wanted to have a say there. We felt much more comfortable with the way Israel has kept Jerusalem as a house of prayer for all peoples. They've got a good track record on it. So I did a draft of a bill to move our embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And Gary had 3 points: recognize Jerusalem as a capital, number 2, move the ambassador immediately, and number 3, then worry about a building. The bill got changed by the time it got through Congress. The presidential waiver added, delay after delay for 23 years now, but President Trump is doing in the order that we originally set out in our initial draft. So I feel vindicated. All that work and running around the halls of Congress was worth it.
So finally, after 2 decades, a long process,
Yes.
but why did you feel it was necessary to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem?
Well, it's symbolic, recognizing the 3,000, even 4,000-year-old Jewish claim and connection to Jerusalem. But there's also substance to it in that the Palestinians have denied any Jewish connection to Jerusalem or the Temple Mount, and we wanted to affirm that. The International Christian Embassy, where I now work for the last 20 years, is founded on the principle of Christian solidarity with the Jewish people in their ancient claim and connection to Jerusalem. And the wisdom of that bill was shown just a few months later. It passed finally in October of '95. In December of that year, Arafat took over Bethlehem for the first time, and when if you were visiting Manger Square that Christmas season, you were not told about the connection between the birth of Jesus in this site. You were handed official PA paper documents that said that the Western Wall in Jerusalem was an exclusively Muslim site. So, tampering with history and such, we need to stand for truth that God attached the Jews to Jerusalem, even to this day, for a redemptive purpose.
And after all these U.S. presidents reneged on moving the embassy, yes, Trump is finally doing it. Why? What do you think influenced the decision for him?
Trump had the courage of his convictions. He said, I made a promise here and I'm going to keep it. And he's the first one who tested these threats of mayhem and violence. And there were some protests, but it did not turn out as bad as many thought. And I think it just shows maybe they were just trying to intimidate us all along. And I think even now the Palestinian Authority and Hamas are desperate to try and stir the Arab street against these embassies coming back. But there's just not enough momentum, and the whole region is in political chaos still. So it just seems the right time to do this.
Now, a recent story in the Washington Post reports that Christians are playing a big role in helping Jews around the world return to Israel. And your group, the ICEJ, is mentioned. Tell us, what do you do to help Jews make Aliyah?
We've been assisting Jews return to Israel from all around the world since we were founded in 1980. We already had people, even in the 70s, helping Jews who could come out through Vienna, through Hungary and Austria. That was the only way out before the fall of communism. But once Soviet communism fell, we've helped over 140,000 Jews make Aliyah to Israel. Wow. We helped around 3,000 last year. And if you look during our almost 40 years of existence, nearly every year we have helped about 10% of the Jews coming back, moving to Israel that year. And there are other Christian ministries do this, but we do it because we believe it's the hand of God that hero nations, he who scattered Israel, will gather them. And there's an invitation in Isaiah. God says, I'll beckon to the Gentiles. They will carry you home on their shoulders and in their arms. We're invited to play a role in this positive side of Bible prophecy, the restoration of Israel.
David Parsons from the International Christian Embassy in Jerusalem. We appreciate your work. Thank you for what you're doing. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Coming up, take a look at one of Israel's natural wonders, the crossroads for millions of birds. About 500 million birds migrate through Israel twice each year. The country lies on one of the world's major migration routes. It's a paradise for bird watchers. The Hula Valley hosts millions of birds and thousands of visitors each year.
This is one of the richest sites in the world for bird watching.
Israel sort of is a junction between 3 continents, and birds that are essentially trying to avoid high mountains, great expanses of water, they funnel through very specific flyways.
Some of these migrating birds fly 2,000 miles in 3 to 5 days without a meal. They fly from Europe and Asia to Africa. For many, Israel is the halfway point. That point is the Hula Valley, part of a 3,700-mile stretch from Syria to Mozambique. The Bible mentions the bird migration as part of a metaphor. Even the stork in the sky knows her seasons, and the turtle dove and the swift and the thrush observe the time of their migration. Some 400 species of birds stop for refueling, and a fraction even winters here, including 30 to 45,000 cranes. Listening to them talk, one can understand why King Hezekiah said he chattered like a crane. In fact, it's not just noise. Experts say crane parents and chicks can actually recognize each other's voices. 20 years ago, there were hardly any cranes here because the natural swamps would drain for farmland. The ground didn't work for agriculture, however, so experts restored part of the lake.
And the answer was essentially to give it back to nature. And so the project has gone sort of in a circle, and we are back to trying to renovate, trying to sort of reproduce what existed here in the past.
That and a special feeding project brought the cranes back, along with the visitors.
This is a wonderful opportunity for us to educate people about birds, about nature. I think that you don't need to be a bird lover when you are coming here, but you are definitely a bird lover when you are going out of this site.
Visitors to Agamon Hahula Reserve can ride the safari wagon into the midst of the cranes. Guides say there's no place else in the world to see so many cranes in such a small area. And bird watchers come from all over to see the phenomenon.
I don't even care if you like birds. You have to experience this and come and see thousands and thousands and thousands of cranes.
If you're a birder, I don't think you could find a better place to come to see the variety of species, as well as the atmosphere and the beauty of the place is just unrivaled in any place in the world.
It's an amazing sight to see so many birds in northern Israel, and an amazing sight to see so many people here in Mahane Yehuda, Jerusalem's open-air market, many of them getting ready for Shabbat. Please remember to pray for the persecuted brothers and sisters in Afrin inside Syria. Well, that's it for this edition. Thanks for joining us. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or YouTube. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.